How do modern cowboys differ from the original cowboy from the past? Imagine a lone figure walking through the dry, dusty ground. His boots hit the earth like thunder. His hat is old and worn, casting a shadow over his eyes that have seen things most people never will. His long coat flaps in the wind, and a shiny six-shooter rests on his hip, catching the sunlight. This isn't just any man. He's a cowboy. He lives in the wild frontier, where each day is a fight against heat, cold, and everything else nature throws at him. He's more than just a rider. He's a survivor, shaped by a tough world. Each scar on his body tells a story of battles with the land, time, and other men. With a small smile and a cool look, this cowboy has grit, dust on his boots, and the wide-open sky as his roof. In his fight against the wild, he becomes a symbol of strength, showing us what it means to keep going even when life is hard. When we think of cowboys, we picture them riding across huge American plains. But the cowboys' story started long before America. Cowboys came from many different cultures around the world. The cowboy we know today is a mix of different people, skills, and experiences, from Spanish vaqueros to indigenous horse riders and African-American cowhands. It's a story of tough people from different backgrounds coming together, building a way of life that could survive the hardest conditions. Cowboys weren't just born in the American West. They came from all over the world, creating a culture that's as strong and varied as the land they rode across. The vaqueros, or Spanish cowboys, were the first to shape what we think of as cowboy culture. In the 1500s, Spanish settlers came to the Americas and brought their cattle herding skills with them. They showed people how to brand, rope, and herd cattle. But they weren't the only ones with these skills for long. Indigenous groups like the Comanche, Apache, and Navajo learned quickly. They mixed these new skills with their own horse riding traditions and became amazing riders. By the 1700s, some indigenous groups, especially the Comanche, were considered some of the best riders in the world. For them, the horse wasn't just an animal, it was part of their life, a way to protect their people and the land. These two groups, Spanish vaqueros and indigenous horsemen, worked together, creating a new kind of cowboy. It was a mix of cultures and skills, something the world had never seen before. In their shared struggles, they formed a bond. The skills they shared weren't just about controlling cattle, they were about survival and honor. When we think about cowboys, we don't often think of African Americans, but they played a huge role in shaping cowboy culture. As early as the 1500s, Africans were brought to Spanish colonies, and many learned the vaquero ways. By the 1800s, after slavery ended, many freed African Americans moved out west to escape racism in the South. They found work as cowhands alongside Mexicans, indigenous peoples, and white settlers. For these men, the West wasn't just a place to work, it was a chance to live free and start new lives. Each day they spent on the plains reminded them how far they had come. African American cowboys brought their own special skills to the job. They worked on ranches, handled livestock, and rode horses like pros. But their contributions were often forgotten, and many cowboy stories focus only on white cowboys. These cowboys worked hard, proving they belonged, even though history often didn't see them. The end of the American Civil War changed things for the cowboy. The United States wanted to expand westward, and the need for cattle grew quickly. Texas became a huge cattle state, and with the building of railroads, people on the East Coast wanted more beef. Cowboys were hired to drive cattle across dangerous land to places like Kansas, where the cattle could be put on trains and sent to the cities. For many cowboys, it wasn't just a job. It was a way to escape the painful memories of war and find peace in the wide-open plains. The dangers they faced, stampedes, rivers, and bandits, seemed small compared to what they had left behind. As the West grew, so did the role of the cowboy. Railroads brought cattle markets closer to cities, changing how the economy worked. But this also marked the beginning of the end for the traditional cowboy life. Barbed wire fences started going up, cutting off the open plains and making it harder for cowboys to move cattle freely. As the land became fenced in, so did the cowboys' sense of freedom. What was once a world with no boundaries now seemed smaller. Cowboy culture spread across the continent, but it didn't look the same everywhere. In Texas, cowboys took on a lot of vaquero traditions. They wore wide hats and leather chaps, and they became famous for their cattle drives. The Texas cowboy was known for being tough and connected to the land. In California, vaqueros developed their own style, influenced by Spanish missions and ranches. Their outfits were fancier, with silver decorations, and they improved their skills over generations. To them, cowboy life wasn't just work. It was a tradition passed down through family. Their deep connection to the land showed in every part of their lives. In the Great Plains, cowboys faced the hardest conditions. They managed huge herds of cattle across wild grasslands. These cowboys lived a life of constant challenges, but they thrived on it. The rough winds and heavy rains reminded them that they were part of the wild, untamed land. Cowboys weren't just cattle herders. In the wild, lawless frontier, they sometimes became lawmen or even outlaws. People like Wild Bill Hickok, known for his fast shooting and sense of justice, walked the fine line between law and chaos. Outlaws like Jesse James and Billy the Kid became symbols of rebellion in the West. In a land with few rules, cowboys became both heroes and villains depending on the situation. Justice wasn't always clear, and survival was the main goal. In many remote towns, cowboys became the first line of defense, sometimes with a gun in hand. Out of the wild frontier, legends were born. Wild Bill Hickok was a lawman who became a gambler, balancing order and chaos. Billy the Kid, a reckless outlaw, became a symbol of the wild rebellion of the West. Then there was Buffalo Bill Cody, who turned cowboy life into a show. His Wild West shows made cowboys into heroes, bringing their stories to people around the world. Behind the entertainment, though, was the truth of the frontier, survival, danger, and the constant fight for freedom. As the 1800s came to an end, technology changed cowboy life forever. The railroad, once the cowboy's best tool for moving cattle, started making long cattle drives unnecessary. Rail lines grew, and ranchers could now ship cattle without needing cowboys to move them. Then came barbed wire, a simple invention that changed everything. With barbed wire, landowners could fence off their property, keeping their cattle in one place. But for the cowboy, it felt like the end of an era. The wide open land was closing off, and so was the cowboy's way of life. Even though the open range disappeared, cowboys didn't. They changed. Rodeos became a way for cowboys to show off their skills, turning cattle herding into a sport. Modern ranching also grew, with cowboys still working the land, even though they now used more machines. But even in today's world, the cowboy spirit, the courage to face whatever comes their way, still lives on. Today, cowboys are more than just people who work the land. They're icons. From movies to books, cowboys represent the American West and the idea of being strong and independent. But the true legacy of the cowboy isn't just in stories. It's in the hard work of real people who live tough lives in harsh conditions. The cowboy's story is much more than we see in movies. It's a mix of different cultures, from Spanish vaqueros to indigenous horsemen, African Americans, and settlers. And so the cowboy legend continues. In rodeos, on ranches, and in the stories passed down through generations, the cowboy spirit lives on, a symbol of strength, toughness, and the courage to keep moving forward. Cowboys may have ridden into the sunset, but their spirit is still wild and free. If you liked this video, then take a look at the ones above for more interesting history.